Deciding how large of a scope you want in history is a pretty hard question, but what happens if you zoom all the way out? Well, then you would get Fernand Braudel and the Annales School of thought. Hey, Cypher here with another Historians Who Have Changed History. Fernand Braudel created what is known as the Annales School, and as you will see, it has been extremely influential. His magnum opus, The Mediterranean, was surprisingly composed initially while he was in a prison camp, doing everything on just tissue paper and from what he knew right off the top of his head. He finished and published The Mediterranean in 1949, which was actually going to be the first of 3 subsequent books. In it, he basically created what some would later call macro history. There was no focus on individual events or particular people in history. Instead, he had combed through archives to get economic tidbits. I mean, this guy did some serious research. He actually went through like medieval letters just to find out the minor fluctuations in bread prices over several centuries. He was trying to grasp how the social structure and economy were working in the Mediterranean, and how it had changed over time in what he would call the mentalité. In studying the mentalité, he expanded the geographic area of the Mediterranean to humongous proportions, going all the way to like the Baltic Sea. It is a gargantuan work and takes up more pages than I care to read again. Some of you might have heard of macroeconomics, but this is far more massive in scale. You see, in trying to understand how changes occurred over time, especially in this huge scale of time, Braudel was fond of saying, events are mere foam on the surface of the waves of history. You might think of Martin Luther pinning his 95 Theses on the door of a chapel as a pivotal event that changed the world. But to Braudel, that's worth about 1 sentence in thousands of pages of text. So macro history, or the Annales School, is the study of history in its broadest form. It tries to see things in total history. This necessarily removes events, instead looking at overarching trends. By doing this, Braudel sought out data that was computable and objective. Any economics major will absolutely love this idea, but most people can't really conceive of how big of a scope this really is. So he took over editing a French journal that was called Annales de Histoire Économique et Sociale, or in English, the Annals of Social and Economic History, which later became shorthand for macro history as the Annales School. Pretty much everything published in that journal was part of this tradition. Then along came a guy named Emanuel Wallerstein. He founded a way of theorizing on top of Braudel's whole Annales School. It was called World Systems Analysis. You might have heard of it, but I'll have to go into that some other time. Some of you might have seen my whole Why is the West Strong series thus far, and World Systems Analysis has actually created their own answer to that question, but I'll have to do an episode on that some other time. But essentially, world systems analysis tries to theorize how the whole world's economic systems function as a whole, as well as how it has changed over time. Of course, even they are not willing to go as far as Braudel, who liked to look at what was called the longue durée. Now, the longue durée is not something that is just, a few years or even 100 years. It's something like a millennium or 2. So he was really trying to understand how the longue durée functioned in history. So as such, Braudel and the Annales School have been extremely influential on history. Many of the theoretical movements since 1949 have been in direct response to him. Microhistory took the exact opposite approach, while Michel Foucault formed a very different way of looking at time. Hell, the new and very popular Big History movement got a lot that it owes to Braudel. But actually, that movement is fundamentally lacking in comparison to him. So by zooming all the way out, Braudel has changed the way we look at history. He created a new school of thought that left the entire profession spinning to catch up. Annales de Histoire économique et sociale. Annales de Histoire